Welcome to another week of Lunch Money. You've got Alice here, who's based in Aotearoa, and I'm currently in Australia. So since I'm in Australia, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their continuing connection to land, community and culture. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. For those of you that are new to Lunch Money, we do these every Thursday at lunchtime New Zealand time, and they're also available as a podcast through Spotify, Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. As I mentioned, I'm Brooke. I'm one of the co-founders and co-CEOs here at Sharesies, and I'm joined by Alice.
Kia ora. Hi and welcome. As Brooke mentions, I'm Alice and I'm the financial analyst here at Sharesies.
Cool. Thanks, Alice. Before we kick into things today, we want to announce that we've just added over 700 new US investment options to Sharesies. So these include a bunch of new US companies that have been requested quite a bit, such as Lemonade and Peloton. So if you want to check that out, that's in our app now. We'll also be adding a lot more investments soon, including American depository receipts, and you'll get to hear all about those and what they mean when we launch them too. So we'll announce these in as soon as our live. So please do stay tuned. So today we're welcomed by a really special guest. We're welcomed by Dr. Brian Ward, CEO of Aroa Biosurgery Limited, and that is one of the Australian Stock Exchange listed companies that is now also available through Sharesies. Just a reminder that if you have any questions for us, you can submit them through the Ask a Question button below through Crowdcast, and don't leave questions in discussion because we may miss them and we really want to make sure we can get your questions answered. And also a really important legal disclaimer, there is no personalised advice being given today through this chat. And also please be kind and respectful to our speakers and your fellow viewers, otherwise we'll have to remove you from this webinar, which obviously we would not want to do. So I'd like to introduce Brian. Brian is the founder and CEO of Aroa Biosurgery, a soft tissue regeneration company that develops, manufactures and distributes medical and surgical products. They're based in Aotearoa. Brian has held senior corporate roles in his life in science and healthcare companies over the past 25 years and has extensive management experience. I think he also mentioned he was a vet before too. So in his role at Aroa, Brian is responsible for leading the company's growth from startup to becoming a fully vertically integrated medical device business. And he's been leading this business ever since it started 13 years ago. So I want to give a big welcome to Brian. Kia ora, Brian. Oh, I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Can you hear me now?
We can.
Yeah, good. Okay, great.
Welcome. Thanks so much for coming to our podcast. So I'm going to pass over to Alice to ask you some awesome questions, and I'll come back to get the questions from the people listening.
Great, thank you.
Over to you, Alice.
Awesome. So welcome, Brian. Perhaps you could just start us off by introducing yourself. Tell us a bit about yourself and how did you end up starting Aroa?
Yeah, so obviously Brian Ward, CEO. I started my career as a vet, as Brooke said. So I spent a little bit of time in clinical practice, and then I really got interested in industry. So I've worked for a number of healthcare companies in different parts of the world. So originally worked in technical roles, and then moved in sales and marketing, corporate development. So I worked in big med tech, but also in big pharma. So I've had a reasonable experience in whole different aspects of this industry. In terms of starting Aroa, I was always been interested in surgery, soft tissue reconstruction. It's been an area I've always been really curious about. And 15 years or so ago, I kind of noticed this real change that was happening in this emergence of this field called regenerative medicine and the use of tissue-based products to reprogram healing in people. And that got me really curious about, what sources of tissue could be used. And what people were finding was a lot of animal-based tissues were starting to be used in this area. So living in New Zealand, I thought, wow, there's got to be opportunities here. So started to do a little bit of work on that, worked with some universities and identified, a tissue source that looked really promising. So on the back of a really, really small amount of data. I got the confidence of some early stage investors, and they decided to back me and provided the capital to get the company started.
That's awesome, and such a great example of a New Zealand company that's at the forefront of tech and doing incredible things in the world. And so maybe you could tell us a bit about the IPO process or the initial public offering. So as a reminder to our listeners, that's when a company first lists on a stock exchange. And so at Aroa, you IPO'd just last year. How did you find that process, and has that changed how the business operates at all?
Yeah, look, we've been thinking about it for a while. We needed to raise more capital, and our business, it has been quite capital intensive. There's obviously a lot of research, regulatory approvals. It takes some time to get to the market with your products. So, we'd looked at doing a listing over the last couple of years. We made the decision to list in 2019, and there's quite a lot of preparation goes into that. So it's a very rigorous process, a lot of preparation in terms of financials and legal disclosures and preparing a prospectus. So for us, it was about a 6-month process, working a lot of work internally, but also working externally with advisors. And we engaged 2 brokers in Australia to help us through the process. We were lucky enough to get to do it twice. COVID came along and scuppered our initial plans, so we did a rinse and repeat and had another go at it. So it was, we've actually one company, 2 opportunities to have a go at it. So it was an interesting process.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would have been really interesting, as you say, to do it to IPO back in 2020 when there was so much other stuff happening in the world that just completely disrupted the way that businesses operate. And so you're listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. Perhaps you could just touch on why you decided to list in Australia when you're headquartered here in New Zealand. So you bypassed the New Zealand Stock Exchange.
Yeah, so I think for us, being an early stage life science company, there's very few companies like us in New Zealand. And so we wanted to go to a market where there was a good cohort of similar companies. And certainly in Australia, there's a large number of earlier stage life science companies. And they've also, there's a strong following by analysts. So we felt that was important. It's a deeper capital market as well. So I think all of those things lined up for us to make it the right proposition for us.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And then, I guess with the likes of, say, your shares now being available through Sharesies, again, you're breaking down those barriers. But just touching on Aroa and what you do, can you tell us a little bit about the technology that you've developed and what different products you currently offer? And, if there's other ones in the pipeline?
Yeah, so all of our products are based on our Aroa ECM technology platform. So what we do is we take a very special layer of tissue that's found in some organs, and it's a particularly thick layer of this tissue in the forestomach of sheep. So that's the first chamber in their digestive tract. And what's really interesting about this is it's a really large organ, and it has this material has really particular characteristics. So what's very unique about it is that it's a very porous material. So what that means is that if you're a cell, you can climb into it really quickly. So that's important. It also has a lot of very important biological molecules that are important signals in healing. And they're sort of attached to the framework of this material. So it provides instructions that help cells regenerate tissue. The other thing about it is that it has lots of blood vessels that flow through it. So what we do is we purify this tissue so that we take away all those cells, and all we're left with is a scaffold or a framework. And that's a framework that helps to fill in tissue really quickly to heal wounds. So it has these unique structural and biological components, and that provides a basis for building tissue really, really quickly in patients if they have some sort of tissue deficit. So that raw material then becomes the basis for building a range of different devices. So we use that as a building block, if you like, to then build specific devices for different types of problems where patients don't heal very well. So an example of that would be in elderly people, things like diabetic ulcers and venous ulcers, which are really difficult to heal wounds. Trauma, where people lose large amounts of tissue and that tissue needs to be replaced. That's another application. Hernia repair, and breast reconstruction post-mastectomy. So there's a wide range of different applications for this technology, and we're at a really early stage. I mean, there's a lot of opportunity to use this in many, many different applications.
That's so fascinating. As someone not from a science background, it just fascinates me so much, and it just seems so incredible, what you can achieve with science and, what you're doing as a business. And so whereabouts are your customers mainly based, and are you trying to grow your presence into any specific parts of the world at the moment?
Yeah, so we've always been a US focused company. So from day one, although we've been based in New Zealand, our target market has been the US. And so we've really, for the first 5 or 6 years of the company, we were solely focused on the US. So initially when we started, we entered into partnership agreements with other companies. So our first market that we sold in was in the United States with a company called Hollister in wound care. And then subsequently, we've had an arrangement with a company called Aroa Biosurgery for hernia and breast reconstruction. Really recently, what we've done is moved to sell some of our products in our own right. So we now sell the wound care products with our own direct sales team. So that's a really big focus for us. We have a team of over 30 people now based in the US, directly working for us. And they're based, right across the country. So we have that team, we have an office in San Diego, and we have this arrangement still in place with Aroa Biosurgery. So more than 95% of our business is focused on the US. We're beginning to commercialize products in other parts of the world as well. So we now have regulatory approvals in over 44 countries. So we're beginning to sell in the European Union. We're in some countries in Asia. We're in the Middle East. We recently had an approval in India. So we're beginning to roll this out in other parts of the world. Outside of the US, we're typically working with local distributors. And so there'll be companies sort of focused on medical sales, typically into hospitals. And so we identify, and often they'll come to us, identify partners that we can potentially work with on a country by country basis.
So working with those partners, that must be how you obviously distribute those products. So are they other life science type companies, or how exactly does that distribution of the product work?
Yeah, they are typically medical device companies. So they're specialists in sales of medical products into hospitals. It's a highly regulated industry, so they need to have specific capabilities, and particularly around distribution and logistics and traceability, those sorts of things. That's a specific group of types of distributors, but they're quite common in most countries throughout the world. Typically, we like to work with companies that have both distribution but also sales and promotional capabilities. And historically, what we've found is typically working with smaller companies in those countries where they've got a strong focus on our success as well.
Mm-hmm. And so you partner with those companies, and then they help sell your products to the customers. So that's how that works.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so who are your customers, and where are they mainly based?
Yeah, so our primary customers are healthcare professionals, and that's a wide range of different people. In outpatient wound care, it's a mix of physicians and nurses. So all of our products are physician only. They need to be prescribed or used by a physician. A lot of our customers are surgeons. So our products are used in inpatient surgery during surgical procedures. So they're a key customer base for us. The patient's also important, obviously, but we don't sell directly to patients, it's through hospitals and physicians. They're the typical customers.
And what about your competitors? Who are they, and what sets Aroa apart from them?
Yeah, it's a mix of companies. So a mix of both very, very large companies and small companies. Typically, what you find is very, very large companies have established portfolios of products. Typically, they're a little bit less innovative, and they typically tend to lag a little bit in terms of innovation. So at the more innovative end, it tends to be small, high growth companies focus on developing innovative technology, and that would be they would be our main set of competitors. I think what sets us apart from those other companies is the performance of our products and our materials. So what's important in healthcare is not both, was two things really, or three things. It's the outcomes, so that the clinical outcomes from the products, and having data to support that. So that's a big focus for us. Safety is obviously important as well. And the third thing is value. Healthcare is very expensive to deliver. So making sure that you're offering very good outcomes at an affordable price for hospitals.
So then, sort of following on from that, what do you see as the biggest risks and opportunities for your company and the industry at the moment?
Yeah, I think right now, definitely, COVID has been a big impact. So we've seen massive changes over the last 12 months. So we've been through a really, really difficult period in hospitals where many patients' surgeries have been postponed because of COVID and because there hasn't been access to hospital resources. And so that's for us certainly. The first 6 months of the last financial year was very slow. What we're now beginning to see is quite a comeback. So, particularly in the US market now, with the rate of vaccination, hospitals opening up, the economy really strengthening, we're really seeing that come back. So I think in terms of risk in healthcare, that's had a major effect. One of the great things about healthcare typically is it tends to be it's one of those services that's required irrespective of how the economy is. And so, healthcare typically isn't something that can be postponed, and people value healthcare. So it tends to be a very robust business. So I think going forward, we think the prospects are really bright. We also see the opportunity for recovery and potentially dealing with a big backlog of patients as well over the next 24 months or so. So we're pretty optimistic about the next 18 months to 2 years.
And so, you discussed COVID being a challenge over the past year or so, but then also that, in the healthcare industry, like you say, it is more robust to what happens in the wider economy. You recently released some quarterly results, and I read that your FY21 product revenues exceeded the company's expectations, and that your second half of FY21 product revenues were up 16% on the previous year. So what was driving that performance, given these challenges faced?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things behind it. I think as patient procedures came back online, we got a good share of those patient procedures. When we initially went through the IPO, we had most of our revenue coming from one product. We'd recently launched another product, Myriad, for soft tissue reconstruction. That was very early in the commercialization process. So what we're beginning to see now is sales start to come through from Myriad, which is really encouraging. We think Myriad is going to be a really strong driver of performance over the next 12 to 24 months. So it's been really heartening to see that start to come through and track up. I think the other thing is just the general improvement in the environment and more access into hospitals, more procedures coming back online.
And so you talk about the Myriad product. I read also that you've recently received FDA approval for another product, your Myriad More Cells. Can you talk us through the process of getting that approval, and what does that now mean for your business?
Yeah, so for every product that we launch in the US, we need a separate regulatory approval. And so that's a process that you work through with the FDA. It's a very rigorous process. There's a very standard format for it. They require, a wide range of data, and that data is really around providing evidence that that product is safe, and that performs the function that you say it performs, and that it's going to be effective in the procedures that you're using it. So, for us, every time we take a product to the FDA, it's a massive internal endeavour to get all that information together. We submit that to them. They will review that. Often there's back and forwards between the company in terms of questions that they'll have. So you tend to have several points in the review process where they'll want clarification. They may want additional data. And so you have this sort of dialogue. So, we now have, at least 10 or so of these approvals. So it's a well-worn path for us. Despite that, it's always a little bit uncertain in terms of time frame and how that pans out. And you're never really confident in terms of all the evidence that they're going to require. So it's it's certainly a mission, but every time you get one of those across the line, there's a little bit of a celebration here.
Yeah, I bet. And great that you've just received approval for another one of the products. It certainly sounds like a very rigorous process that you have to go to reach that stage. Yeah. So we might have time for sort of one last question before I pass back to Brooke, who'll cover off some of the questions that the audience have asked. But reflecting on the past 12 months, you've obviously done a lot with the business, going public and COVID and everything. What's something that you've learnt that will inform how you run the company going forward?
Oh, that's a good question. We've seen a massive amount of change, and I think everyone has over the last 12 months. I think for us, healthcare is probably quite a conservative industry. People are cautious for a really good reason, and they haven't tended to adopt new ways of interacting. They've been quite conservative in terms of other than face-to-face interaction. I think what's been interesting for us is just to see the change there over the last 12 months, and certainly, the ability to engage remotely a lot more than we've seen in the past. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic for companies from an engagement perspective with healthcare professionals. And I think hopefully a lot of that sticks. Some of it, of course, face-to-face will still be important, but I think there's a changing dynamic, certainly from a clinical engagement perspective, which I think could be really, really helpful for the future.
That's really interesting. Yeah, great. So I'll pass back over to Brooke now. So Brooke, do you want to tell us about what questions the audience have been asking?
Yeah, sure thing. And thanks so much for that rich insight there, Brian. We've got some really cool questions come through here. One from Joe. I'm a young scientist in New Zealand and would love to hear your thoughts on what the unique challenges are in the NZ biotech companies, or that New Zealand biotech companies face, and also what our unique value is.
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I think I've been in the whole biotech life science area for a long time, and I think if you go back 10, 15 years, I think you could say there was the chances in New Zealand were probably relatively limited if you wanted to get into a life science company. I think things are changing dramatically. You've seen there's certainly more companies getting started, which is fantastic. So jobs, great jobs and really interesting jobs. You're seeing better financing, so a lot more developed local sort of ecosystem. Science is becoming so much more internationalized, which is fantastic as well. So I think the prospects for people, and I think it's the same for anybody with technical capabilities or entrepreneurial capabilities, just fantastic opportunities. It's definitely improving year on year. So I'm pretty optimistic. I know for ourselves, we increasingly find it challenging to recruit good technical people.
Yeah. That's good to know, and really clear there. What are the big ethical issues facing Aroa?
Ethical. Look, I mean, ethical. It's an interesting question. I think there's a challenge. I mean, it's in healthcare generally. I think is healthcare products are very expensive to develop, and the time frames, the investment, the regulatory oversight, all of those things contribute to the cost of delivering healthcare. And I think the dealing with how do you reconcile pricing with access, I think is a challenge everywhere in the world. Healthcare is it's incredibly expensive, and so balancing that with access, is a tricky one.
Yeah, because your purpose is for everybody. I saw that, which I thought was really cute take on that. So you started in 2008. Was it a bit of a tough year to start?
Look, I got the first financing round done at the end of 2007, and the world looked very good. And so then I thought, after that it'll be easy. And then we went into 2008 and the GFC came along, and it was really tough. So for an early stage company that looked more like a science experiment than a business, it was really challenging for a couple of years. So we had, the first 2 or 3 years were really tough. Thankfully things came back from there. But that whole period around the GFC, it was like a nuclear winter for early stage company financing.
Yeah, I can imagine. And next question as a founder, I'm intrigued on it myself too. But what was the spark that kind of led to you to create this company that is on the verge of tech and bioscience, and like how did you corral the team around you, and how many of you were there in the early days, and kind of how is that growing?
Yeah. Really around this whole idea of this is really a really, really interesting field that's got a huge amount of promise for so many people, and lots of people, suffer from really poor healing. So that was kind of one part. The other part was, there's got to be an opportunity in New Zealand to be able to develop this type of business, and I'd love to be involved in that. I was previously involved, in the biotech industry here in New Zealand, so. I sort of thought, gosh, it'll be really good to be able to build a business that really goes after this new opportunity. And so, I was lucky enough to, have a really good network of people that could kind of help me bring this together. In terms of the early days, it was definitely in the trenches. We were, a whole bunch of us piled into a really tiny office with a really small lab. Living on top of each other for about 5 years. So it was all of those sorts of war stories that you can imagine. But look, a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and I'm really pleased to say that a lot of people that were involved in the early stage of the company are still with the company, have grown with the company, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that is really great. 13 years on. And so were there did you have people straight away that were with you on this, or did you have to really sell the idea and get people on board?
Yeah, so I started the company with a PhD student, helping, and I had a research agreement with one of the Crown Research Institutes. So it was just really 2 people, and then it was really about convincing people that this was a good idea. So as you get more people involved in the company, that gets a little bit easier. But yeah, the first 6 to 12 months were probably a little bit challenging. But yeah, look, I've been really lucky. I mean, our Vice President of Clinical Development and Research, Barnaby May, he joined me 6 months or so into the business. He'd recently come back from being in San Francisco with a biotech company and university. So, he brought in, a lot of scientific credibility, and he helped to build the scientific team. So it's, you sort of cobble things together. We're sort of bootstrapped it, as everybody does. It may not have been particularly pretty, when we got started, but it's certainly, got better over time.
Yeah, nice. I got a really interesting question here too. Can you please give some information on the production process and your expected challenges as you scale up for future demand?
Yeah, so we currently we've got a very well established scaled up manufacturing process. So currently we have capacity to do about $30 million in revenue. We we can see that sort of us hitting that ceiling on capacity pretty quickly. So at the end of last year, we decided to begin building a second facility, and so we're now into that build. That build will come online towards the end of this year, and so that will take us up to $90 to $100 million in capacity. In the meantime, we've added some additional capacity to the existing facility, so that's probably at about $35-40 million now. So we've got a lot of experience in scaling it up. A lot of the investment in manufacturing in the initial facility is the big significant investment. So now for us to build additional capacity, it's relatively quick and fast.
Yeah, great. So you've built this capacity, and that's great. But how do you actually get this organic material, and where does it actually come from? And are there any kind of issues or tricky things about sourcing it?
Yeah, so what we do is it's really a byproduct from the New Zealand's meat industry. So we have the specific tissue isolated in a specific way. Some of that process we do, some of that process is done by our suppliers. What's really important for us is both the quality of that material, but also traceability. So we need a full history on where this tissue comes, for our own quality requirements. There's a specific specification around that type of tissue as well, to make sure that we end up with the end product that we need. So that's very carefully managed. So though the tissue comes to us partially processed, and then we put it through a purification process in our own facility. That purification process sort of ends with the tissue being freeze-dried, and then that really becomes that building block. So once it gets to that stage, different products are really go down different sort of fabrication lines, if you like. Each product is a sort of slightly different format or whatever, and so that really is sort of the downstream side of manufacturing.
Yeah. We've got another question here, and talking about downsides, I guess. You said the majority of your customers or your clients, I guess, are based in America.
Yeah.
What challenges, or what challenges do you face being, based mostly in Aotearoa?
Yeah. I think, so we have a research team, our manufacturing, regulatory quality, and part of our corporate team here. I think from a manufacturing development, corporate support perspective, to be honest, it doesn't really matter where you're based. But we've managed to establish a really strong capability here with a lot of expertise. So it kind of makes sense for us to be here. It also makes sense for us to be here, given the tissue source. Our sales and marketing, of course, is based in the US, because that's the market that we're operating in. So, I think it works very well for us. We, as a company, we spend an enormous amount, or have up until recently spent an enormous time traveling. So, we've been in the US, monthly, if not weekly sometimes, for various things. So, from the beginning of the company, we've operated across the US and New Zealand pretty seamlessly. And I think that's put us in good shape to, continue to grow the business there.
Yeah. And I'll ask my final question here from Ravi. Can you explain, with Aroa out there, say 5 to 10 years, what does the world look like? What's your kind of strategy? From your perspective, what would you like it? If your books came to life, what would that look like?
Yeah.
Your 5 to 10 year strategy is, and any objectives or targets that you can share in that regard.
Yeah, so we think we have a really unique opportunity to build a world-leading tissue regeneration company. The scale of this business, could be really, really significant. We don't see that there's a lack of opportunity. There's an enormous market opportunity for these products. The conditions that we treat just continue to increase year on year. So we think we can be a leader in this industry, and there's no reason for us to think that we can't. So we're pretty excited. We think this is potentially another Fisher & Paykel Healthcare.
Oh, fantastic. That's awesome. Hey, thank you so much for coming today, and thank you so much for everyone listening. It was great to have you here, Brian. I'm the CEO and founder of Aroa Biosurgery. I'm a little scared earlier I might have said biosecurity. I guess I haven't gone
you
through
did.
I'm sorry about that. Biosurgery. Thank you so much for your time. So next Thursday, we'll be joined by Victoria Harris, a portfolio manager at Devon Funds Management. I think one of the few wahines or women in fund management here in Aotearoa, and also the founder of The Curve. So you can register through the link that's been added in the chat. Lunch Money will be back next Thursday. Keep an eye out on Share Club, and you can join via Facebook if you're not on it already. We've also shared that link, and also via our Lunch Money newsletter, which you can subscribe to at the footer of our Sharesies website at any stage. Have a great week, enjoy your weekend, and see you next week. Ka kite anō.